Welcome to the Retro Graveyard. This time we have the Amstrad SM-104 vertical linear turntable with radio and twin tape decks, originally released in 1984. I got hold of this earlier this year knowing that the turntable didn't work, so later in the video I'm going to attempt to fix it. You may be aware that Amstrad weren't exactly known for their quality products back in the 80s. They were cheaply made but had attractive designs. It comes with a pair of speakers. I wasn't able to find out the wattage. I can't imagine they were very high though. It's glued shut, so I can't even have a peek inside either. The output is apparently 50 watts total music power. It's mostly silver in colour. The entire front section is painted plastic. So let's have a look at its functions. On the bottom left here we have the twin tape decks with auto stop, and underneath there are two microphone jacks, then play, rewind, fast forward, stop eject and pause. Then an ALC indicator light. ALC stands for automatic level control and is used when recording to prevent your recording from being too loud and distorted. Next are the controls for the second tape deck, as before but with a record button. Then there is a socket for headphones. On the bottom right there is a metal tape selector, then noise reduction, which is the equivalent of Dolby, then high speed dubbing for recording tape to tape at a quicker speed. Basically both decks will run fast so you can record your copies quicker. The rumble button is used for record players and is for when vibrations coming from the turntable mechanism itself creates a bassy rumbling sound and overpowers the music being played. Pressing this button will reduce that rumble. Loudness changes the sound levels depending on your preference and volume used, and then there's the power button. Above this section is a graphic equalizer with 4 sliders plus 2 for the volume on the left and right channels. Above this is a counter for the second tape deck. Then above that is a column of identical looking square buttons. I'll start from the top. First there are some record player controls. The speed selector for 33 and 45 RPM, then record size selector for 7" or 12". Then the Q button, which lifts the arm up and if continued to be pressed will move the arm to the left. So you can use Q and return to select tracks manually. Next, pressing the play button will move the arm to the start of a record and lower the arm down and start playing automatically. The next section of buttons are for the radio. FM first, medium wave and long wave. When any of these are selected it will automatically turn the radio on. Next are the buttons to switch between sources. Tape is first, then phono for the record player. The last 3 buttons start with a stereo or mono selector, a mute button for when tuning the radio which mutes the static noise in between stations, and last of all is the automatic frequency control or AFC button, which when switched on will keep your desired station tuned in. And just below that is the tuning dial for the radio. Next is the record player area with a plastic platter that has no rubber feet or any kind of protection for your precious vinyl. And here is the arm which moves across automatically using a motor, which we will see later. The centre of the platter has a removable spindle for holding the vinyl in place, and there is an adapter for records without the standard hole. And just to note that the door doesn't have to be closed for the record player to work. On the back is just this panel at the bottom with the built-in mains wire, sockets for the supplied speakers and an FM aerial socket. And just an extra note, it has a depth of 20 cm, so I guess it could be fitted in places a regular stereo system couldn't be. Amstrad also released the SM-103 with a single tape deck. The only difference I can see is that in the place of the second deck is storage for up to 8 cassettes without cases. Schneider were a German company that worked closely with Amstrad's computer division in the 80s, and it seems in their audio electronics division as well, as they released their own version of the SM-104 in 1984 called the Schneider Vertical Audio Line. Model number VAL 1002 and the single deck version the VAL 1000. These came in a dark grey colour rather than silver. Now on to the repair. First of all, I need to remove the 3 screws on either side of the back panel. And before I carry on, I must point out that I am in no way an expert on fixing things like this. I'm fairly new to it and I'm just going to do my best. Please also note that I am unplugging the unit as and when appropriate and keeping my fingers away from anything dangerous at all times. I don't have any reason to think there isn't any power going to the turntable section, as the tape decks and radios seem fine. The first thing I did was check if the motors here were seized up. The top one that controls the movement of the arm is seized, but I managed to free it by hand. The other motor for the turntable doesn't seem seized up at all. But that didn't make any difference. Apparently giving a motor a tap can cause it to free up and start working, so I gave them a gentle tap. I moved the arm across manually to a point where it should activate the motor that turns the turntable. After giving the motor a tap, the turntable did start to move, albeit visibly slower than it should be. It didn't make any difference to the other motor. The arm and play buttons now seem to be moving the arm up and down too, and that's activated by this switch. When the arm button is pressed, this lets the arm go and it slowly drops onto the record. So my plan is to remove these motors and take them apart and clean them. I will also replace the turntable belt and the stylus. I need to desolder these wires first and then remove these screws. I later realised I could just loosen these screws and twist the motor to remove it, which I'll show you when I remove the second motor. So now I'm going to take this apart. I just inserted a small flat blade screwdriver into the slots and prised it open. Then it's quite easy just to disassemble. I'm using some degreaser to clean inside here and clean the armature. This was the first time I attempted it, but I still needed to take it apart a second time as I hadn't cleaned this part, which is probably the most important bit, as that is where the brushes need to make a good contact. So then I reassembled the motor, making sure to put the brushes back as they were before, and then it quite easily just pushes back together again. So then I replaced the motor and soldered the wires back on. At the same time I changed this belt for another one that I had, as the one on there didn't seem too good. Although the motor would now move the assembly across, it wouldn't always return automatically at the end of a record. So first I changed the belt back to the original to see if it improved, and it did fix the issue. Another problem was that sometimes the assembly wouldn't move when it should. I'll explain. When playing a record on this system, as it is a linear mechanism, the motor here controls the spindle that in turn moves this section that is attached to the arm on the other side. As it plays the record, it automatically moves the arm across a bit at a time until it reaches the end of the record, and then lifts the arm and returns to the start and stops the turntable spinning. You can see where the arm assembly contacts with the circuit board below to control when it should move. The arm isn't fixed in a straight position, so it has some play in it and will move along with the grooves of the record, but the assembly will move it again before the arm can no longer move with the grooves. If it didn't do this, then the arm would just skip and keep playing the same section over and over. So I needed to solve the issue with the assembly not moving across the record when it should and getting stuck. I noticed the belt didn't seem lined up correctly, so I adjusted this part so this rod was in a different position. This isn't exactly precision engineering, and when fixing the screw in place the rod moves around a lot. Anyway, after some trial and error, the belt was aligned and there were no further issues. So now on to removing the other motor that turns the platter and replacing the belt. So first I need to remove the platter. The spindle in the middle needs to be unscrewed clockwise. It was very stiff, so I used some pliers and some cloth so I didn't damage the spindle. There is a circlip to remove as well, then the platter comes off when pushed from the back. To remove the motor this time I'm going to loosen each screw a tiny amount, and then the motor can be twisted like this and removed easily from the back. I didn't desolder this one as it seemed easy enough just to leave it attached in place. Here is a close-up of the brushes and you can see this area needs a good clean. It should be the same colour as the brushes. After cleaning I replaced the motor and the platter with the new belt. I used the flat blade screwdriver to lift the belt off the platter and onto the motor spindle from the back. Then I replaced the circlip and the spindle. The platter was now turning more consistently and seemed fine. Last of all I needed to alter the speed as it was running a bit too slow. There are two holes here on the board, one for 45 RPM and one for 33 RPM. Using a flat blade screwdriver you can change the speed to suit. Next I replaced the stylus. So this section just pulls out. The old stylus popped out by itself as I was doing this. So the new one just clicked into place like this. There is a bunch of fluff inside here that I cleaned out later. Then just line and push back into place. So here it is working as it should. So pressing play will activate the arm. The arm will move across to the right position and lower itself onto the record. If you press Q when a record is playing, it will lift the arm. Then you can press it again to move the arm left, or use return to move it right. This way you can select a different track. I can't play much music to show you the sound quality as YouTube won't like it, but as you would expect, it doesn't sound great. There is the option to plug into the headphone jack and use an external amp, which helps quite a bit, but it's still pretty poor. Before I finish, I'll give the heads and rollers a clean in the tape decks with some isopropyl alcohol. I'm surprised the belts have held up in these, but I'm sure it will need replacing in the future. So that was the Amstrad SM-104 vertical linear turntable. As most people know, Amstrad products of this time looked interesting, but were cheaply made and not of great quality. Despite this, the system has managed to last all these years, and with some expected maintenance, considering its age, is now fully functional again. Yes, of course, there are much better systems out there than this, but to me it's an interesting part of tech history from the 80s. That's all for this video. I'm off to see what else I can dig up in the retro graveyard. Thanks for your attendance.